Answer and instruction of the Queen of Heaven. My dearest daughter, it is true that divine justice closed heaven against mortals on account of the first sin, until my most holy Son should open it by satisfying most abundantly for men through his earthly life and death. It was befitting and just that this same Redeemer, who had united to himself the redeemed members and opened heaven, should, as their chief, enter before any of the children of Adam. If Adam had not sinned, it would not have been necessary to follow this course, for men would have ascended of themselves in order to enjoy the divinity in the empyrean heavens. Having, however, foreseen the fall of man, the most blessed Trinity provided for the course followed at present. This great mystery was referred to by David in the 23rd Psalm, when, speaking of the spirits of heaven, he repeats twice, "Lift up, ye princes, your gates, and be ye lifted up, ye eternal gates, and the King of glory shall enter in." They are here called the gates of the angels, because only for them were they open, but for mortal men they were closed. Although these heavenly courtiers were aware of the fact that the incarnate Word had already thrown down the bars and bolts of guilt, and that he was now ascending rich and glorious with the spoils of death and sin, bringing with him the fruits of his passion in the accompanying hosts of the glorious saints released from limbo. Nevertheless, the holy angels give vent to their admiration and breathless suspense at this wonderful novelty, asking, "Who is this King of glory?" For he was a man, and of the same nature as the one who had lost for himself and for all his race the right to enter into heaven. They themselves give answer to the question, saying, "The Lord who is strong and mighty, the Lord mighty in battle, the Lord of virtues, the King of glory." This was as if they confessed their conviction that this man who was now coming up from the world in order to open the eternal gates was not a mere man and is not included under the law of sin, but that he was true God and true man, who, strong and powerful in battle, had overcome the strong-armed one that reigned in the world, had taken away his reign, and despoiled him of his weapons. And he was the Lord of virtues, as one that had exercised them as a master, with sovereignty over them, and without any contradiction of sin and defect. As the Lord of virtues and as the Lord of glory, he now came in triumph, distributing virtues and glory to his redeemed, for whom as man he had suffered and died, and whom as God he was now raising up to the eternal and beatific vision, having broken the bars and shackles imposed by sin. Since this, O soul, was the work of my dear Son, the true God and man, he, as the Lord of virtues and graces, exalted and adorned me with them from the first moment of my immaculate conception. And as, moreover, the hindrance of sin touched me not, I was free from the impediments which prevented other mortals from entering into the eternal gates of heaven. On the contrary, the powerful arm of my Son acted with me as being the mistress of all virtues and as the Queen of heaven. Because he was to vest himself and assume unto himself human nature from my flesh and blood, he was beforehand in preparing me and making me like himself in purity and exemption from fault, and in other divine gifts and privileges. As I was not a slave of sin, I exercised the virtues not as a subject, but as a mistress, without contradiction, but with sovereignty, not like the children of Adam, but like the Son of God, who was also my Son. For these reasons, the celestial spirits, who had possession of the eternal gates as their own, opened them up for me, perceiving that the Lord had created me more pure than all the most exalted spirits in heaven, and made me their queen and the mistress of all creation. Remember also, my dearest, that he who makes the law can also dispense with it freely, and this the Supreme Lord and Legislator did with me, extending the scepter of his clemency toward me more readily than Ahasuerus did to Esther. For the common laws regarding others and consequent on their guilt applied not to me, who was to be the mother of the author of grace. Although I could not, as a mere creature, merit such blessed privileges, yet the divine clemency and goodness of God turned toward me with full liberality, and he was pleased with the humility of his servant, in order that for all eternity the author of such prodigies might be praised. Do thou also, my daughter, according to my directions, bless and magnify him for these benefits bestowed upon me. My admonition to thee, whom, in spite of thy weakness and poverty, I have chosen with such generous kindness as my disciple and companion, is this: that thou strive with all thy powers to imitate me in an exercise in which I persevered during my whole life, from the very first moment of my birth, omitting it on not a single day, however full of cares and labors it might have been. This exercise was the following. Every day at beginning of dawn, I prostrated myself in the presence of the Most High, and gave him thanks and praise for his immutable being, his infinite perfections, and for having created me out of nothing. Acknowledging myself as his creature and the work of his hands, I blessed him and adored him, giving him honor, magnificence, and divinity, as the supreme Lord and Creator of myself and of all that exists. I raised up my spirit to place it into his hands, offering myself with profound humility and resignation to him, and asking him to dispose of me according to his will during that day and during all the days of my life, and to teach me to fulfill whatever would be to his greater pleasure. This I repeated many times during the external works of the day, and in the internal ones I first consulted His Majesty, asking his advice, permission, and benediction for all my actions. Be very devout toward my most sweet name. I wish that thou be convinced of the great prerogatives and privileges which the Almighty concedes to it, so that I myself, when I saw them in the divinity, felt most obliged and solicitous to make a proper return. And whenever the name Mary occurred to my mind, which happened often, and whenever I heard myself called by that name, I was aroused to thankfulness and urged to new fervor in the service of the Lord, who gave it to me. Thou hast the same name, and I wish that in proportion it should cause the same effects in thee, and that thou imitate me faithfully by following the lesson given thee in this chapter without failing in the least point from this day onward. And if in thy weakness thou shouldst fail, rouse thyself immediately, and in the presence of thy Lord and mine, acknowledge thy fault, confessing it in sorrow. Repeating these holy exercises over and again with solicitous care, thou shalt find forgiveness for imperfections, and grow accustomed to strive after what is highest in all virtues and most pleasing to the Lord. Then, following the light which he gives, and in pursuance of that which is most pleasing and agreeable to thy own tastes and mine, thou shalt not be denied the grace of employing thyself entirely in listening, attending to, and obeying in all things thy spouse and Lord, who seeks in thee only what is most pure, most holy, and perfect, and a will prompt and eager to put the same into practice.